All right, everybody, we're back for part two of chapter 11. And so we're just going to jump right into it. So we stopped last time on the map of the Ottoman Empire. And it showed you how far they were able to expand their territory between 1300 and 1566, which is going to be the height of their territorial expansion by the end of 1566. Once again, the Ottoman Empire is going to be one of the longest lasting empires that we have in the world's history, and it's going to be in effect or around until around 1922, or towards the end of World War One, depending on what sources you're looking at. So let's go to the next slide. It's going to be the Safavid Empire in Iran. So in Persia, the Safavid Empire emerged based on the Islamic Shia traditions, which are going to be very different from the Ottoman Sunni faith. We've talked about this a little bit. So how they chose their leaders after Muhammad passed away, the founder of Islam. That is how they're going to see. That is where their differences are going to start from, and that's going to lead to a lot of military or a lot of military conflicts. And even to this day, there's still some issues that happen between Sunni and Shia Muslims. So we're going to see that's going to be a main difference. And so it doesn't mention it right here in the book, but we're going to see that the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals are all going to have roots in the Turks. So the Turks are going to be part of why all of those Islamic empires rise up. But we're going to see specifically with the Safavids, they're going to be a mixture of Persian influences along with those Turkish influences together to make the Safavid Empire. All right, so Mongols too. So Mongol conquest brought greater destruction to Persia, leaving the region more volatile and unstable. All right, so just like I've said a few times, when you're only able to take over and conquer land if usually the political or the government system is already in that land already is already on its way out. So it's not easy to conquer a healthy society or a healthy environment. But if that environment is already fallen by the wayside, it's much easier to swoop and clean that up or grab that up. And we're going to see the Islamic empires are going to thrive on that. They're going to thrive heavily on that because they're going to be able to basically expand their territories without much pushback. So let's talk about the Mongols first, though. So initially, the Mongols are going to reject Islam, but they're going to practice religious tolerance. So they're going to hire Jewish administrators. They're going to have Christian soldiers, but initially they're not going to be Islamic. Even though we now know the Mongols for being an Islamic empire, they're not originally going to start off that way. But as they conquer more areas, the religion is going to change. So by 1295, the Khan or ruler declared Islam as the state religion. So, towards the height of that Mongol era or empire, we're going to see that they're going to change over from not necessarily having a religion that one of the five universalizing religions, but they're going to embrace Islam because Islam's going to help them trade, do military things much faster and things like that. So after the Mongol decline, we're going to see the region is going to fall into Sufi brotherhood led by Safa al-Din, or the Safavids, the Turk-speaking warriors who embraced Shiism. So once again, that Sufism is going to be the part or the sect of Islam that brought Islam down to the common person and helped it expand much quicker across the Asian continent region. Okay. All right, but specifically in this region, we're going to see that they're going to focus mostly on Shiism as the Safavids start to take over. And Safavids are not known for being as tolerant as the Ottomans, and we'll talk about that soon. So Safavids are not tolerant. Initially, they're not tolerant, and they're going to have a ruler that's going to make them tolerant. The Ottomans, for the majority, are going to be known as a very tolerant society. And by tolerant, I mean that you can practice whatever religion that you want to, as long as you're willing to pay that jizya, that tax, in order to, pay for that, or in order to practice whatever faith you want to. All right, so the early Safavid Empire. So Safavids created a single-mindedly religious state with Shah Ismail. And it's going to be the most dynamic of the Islamic states. So Ismail is going to declare Shiism the official state religion, and subjects are forced to choose between conversion or death. So once again, the Ottomans, you can practice what you want as long as you pay a tax. Safavids, Nope, not happening, not at all. Either you're going to be Shia Islam or Shia Muslim, excuse me, or you're going to be dead. There's no paying attacks. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and we're gonna see later on. It's gonna impact some of their trading and who's willing to trade with them because they're not going to allow non-Christian people to come in, or excuse me, non-Muslim people to come in. All right, so by 1502, so just 1 year after Shah Ismail is going to take power. So the Shah just means the ruler. Whenever you see Shah, you're going to know that's going to be an Islamic area. More than likely, it's going to be a Shia area. Whenever you see Sultan, that's probably going to be a Sunni area, but it's definitely going to be Islamic. So Shah, Sultan, those things just mean Islamic rulers. So by 1502, Ishmael is going to declare himself the first Shah, okay, the Persian word for king of the Safavid Empire. So he's the first king of the empire. He's going to revive the Persian notion that Shahs are divinely chosen. So just like in a lot of other places, you're going to see that divine right, that mandate of heaven, that divinely chosen, something where someone woke up one day and was like, hey, God told me that I am the person who's supposed to lead you guys. So therefore you guys need to listen to me. And usually during those time periods, people will listen if you had a charismatic leader. So that's going to be brought back. So we're going to have the belief that your government and your religion are going to be fused, usually by your leader. And that leader is going to be chosen by God to lead and to move forward. Activist clergy viewed themselves as political and religious enforcers against heretical authority. So let's go on and look up that word, okay? So that basically means believing or practicing in religious hearsay. So basically they wanted to make sure that religion or Islam was fused into all actions in the country or in that region. So politically, religiously, they want to make sure that everything is all intertwined and things that are not done outside of religious control and religious dominance. And we're going to see that's going to be part of why Islam is going to be seen as a universalizing religion because they have political support to make sure that they are infused in trade, in politics, and in things like that. All right, so because the Safavids did not tolerate diversity, they never created an expansive empire and transformed the former Sunni territory into a Shiite stronghold. Okay, so basically because they're going to be so intolerant, it limits who they're going to be able to trade with. They want all the people that they're trading with to be Islamic, not just Islamic or not just Muslim, but they want them to be Shia. And that's going to limit their trading areas, especially when you look at their location. They're kind of smack dab in between two other Islamic kingdoms. You have the Ottoman Empire to the west, and then you have the Mughal dynasty over to the east. So they never really had a chance to expand, especially since they weren't willing to trade, even though they had a good trading location. So because they were less tolerant or not tolerant at all towards diversity, it's going to limit or prevent them from expanding their empire, which led to their more rapid decline. Of the three Islamic empires, the Safavids are going to be the shortest of them. All right, so here is your view of the Safavid Empire. And by the way, the Safavid Empire is only going to reach its heights. Only time it reaches its heights in terms of region, in terms of land, is going to be when they get a leader named Shah Abbas, who is going to be more tolerant and more accepting of non-Muslims and of non-Shia Muslims specifically. That allows them to trade faster or expand their territory more quickly. But after he passes away and after he dies, we're going to see they're going to go back to that religious intolerance, which further leads to the decline of their society and of their empire. All right, so here is a map. It's pretty much across the Persian Gulf, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea. In that region, we can see it all through here, and the Arabian Sea. So we call this the Arabian Peninsula. Is pretty much primarily, where the Safavid Empire is pretty close to. Okay, all right. So let's go on and move on to the Delhi Sultanate in early Mughal Empire. So once again, Sultanate. Whenever I see Sultanate, definitely going to be something to do with Islam. It's going to be how they are dominated. So we're going to have a Sultan-controlled area. Delhi, just like New Delhi in modern-day India, Delhi is the same, around the same area as New Delhi is in the same place as Old Delhi or just Delhi. Okay, so Mughals are going to create a regime on the foundations of the Delhi Sultanate, which avoided Mongol conquest, but had to face the Tamerlane and his nomadic warriors. So a lot of other places are dealing with nomads coming in and destroying their stuff. So these places are called the gunpowder empires because they have access to gunpowder. So just because they have access to gunpowder, that means that the nomadic tribes also have access to gunpowder, which means that their military might is usually going to be, I won't say stifled, but they're going to have comparable militaries for nomadic people and big empires like the Mughal, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and things like that. All right, and so because of that, once again, the Delhi Sultanate is already going to be on its way out. It's crumbling, and that's how we're going to see the Mughal dynasty is going to be able to rise up. So the Ottomans are going to take over parts of crumbling Byzantine Empire. Okay, the Safavids are going to take over another crumbling empire. All right, let me pull that up. Parts of the Persian Empire. Okay. And then we're going to see the Mughals are going to take over the Delhi Sultanate, or the ruins or the end parts of the Delhi Sultanate. Okay, so we're going to see rivalries, religious revival, and the first Mughal emperor. So just like in other places, they're going to have a lot of issues with dominating their gigantic regions. So all three of these empires expand rapidly, and they take over very diverse regions with very diverse languages, very diverse populations, diversity of everything. So it's going to be hard for them to kind of control long term the gigantic region that they initially conquered. The Mughal Empire is not going to be any different. So they're going to conquer what we now know as modern day India. So modern day India, even to this day, is a Hindu-dominated society. So because they're Hindu-dominated society, when you have Muslim leaders, there's going to be pushback against those Muslim leaders. And that's going to be part of what leads to some of the rivalries and the religious issues that pop up in the area. But there is going to be one leader. His name is Akbar. He's going to try his hardest to bring a unification between Muslims and Hindus in India. But unfortunately, it's not going to be very long lasting. Right? So the collapse of the Delhi Sultanate precipitated religious revivals. We have Sufism in Bengal as a form of Islam. So we're going to see some Islam is going to be embraced and absorbed because you have the Delhi Sultanate, and then followed by another Islamic ruling group called the Mughals. All right, so there is going to be a little bit of adoption, not too much, not heavily, because even to this day, India is not known for being an Islamic or dominated country. We're also going to see that Hinduism is going to continue to rise in Bengal as well. So you have your competing forces of Islam and Hinduism already popping up during this time period. Then we have Sikhism in Punjab. It's going to be a form of Islam formed by Nanak, and it's going to be in northern India. So northern India, that's going to be where most of your cultural blending is happening because they're closer to more of those Muslim societies in those areas. If you go further down towards the tip portion of India, we're going to see that area is going to be heavily dominated by Hindus. All right, so Sikhism is going to be different from traditional Islam because it's going to stress the Islamic concept of the unity of God, but also the unimportance of prophets and a Hindu belief in rebirth. So it's going to see a kind of syncretism or a fusion because of the location of it. So we're going to see a little bit of Indian culture and Islamic culture kind of rising and fusing together. The rebirth portion is definitely adopted from Hinduism. The unity of God, the unimportance of prophets. So basically they're bringing down that religion to the common person once again, like Sufism. So they're bringing it back down to the common person and removing your need to talk to prophets or priests or drawing a blank on what Islamic church leaders are called, okay? And so because of that, that's going to help you expand Islam even further. Even though it's not going to be the most adopted religion in India, it's still going to help it spread further because you're bringing it down to the common person without the need of having a prophet or someone kind of interfering between you and God. So the unification of God. All right, so the Punjab governor is going to invite the Turkish Mongol Prince Babur, the Tiger, the prince son of Tamar, to India in 1526. And Babur's going to lay the foundation for the Mughal Empire and the third Islamic dynasty, the third great Islamic dynasty. All right, so we're going to see the falling of the Delhi Sultanate. It's going to lead to the rising of the Mughal Empire. So now we're going to move on to Islamic dynasties, the next slide. The three new Islamic empires all established their legitimacy via military, religious, and bureaucratic powers. So one more time. So all of them are going to have very strong militaries. They're going to have the advantage of gunpowder. So they're going to have cannon weapons. They're going to have cavalry, infantry. They're going to ride horses and things like that. So they're going to use that gunpowder to help dominate. So religious, they're all going to be Islamic empires. So two of the empires are going to be predominantly Shia, but we're going to see in India, they're going to have a Sikhism rise up, and Sufism and Sunni. Anyway, we have 4 different sects of Islam that are in that area, but Ottomans are definitely Sunni, and the Safavids are going to be Shia, and we're going to see a mixture of things happening in India. And bureaucratic power. So when you expand these areas rapidly, you're going to need to be able to control these areas in these regions. So we're going to see that these empires are going to look to the east. They're going to go towards China and say, hey, China, we see you with the civil service examination. And they're all going to implement versions of the civil service examination in their own areas to help build their bureaucracy and help build their legitimacy. Because once again, they're controlling wide varieties, wide languages, a wide variety of languages, ethnicities, cultures, and things like that, and trying to get dominance and control. That also means when they pick leaders for these things, they're going to make sure they pick leaders that are from the Islamic portions of the government, but also from the native areas as well. Okay. And finally, we're going to see this is going to enable them to claim vast domains that continue the movements of goods, ideas, merchants, and scholars beyond and across political boundaries. So that's going to be the hallmark of these Islamic dynasties. All 3 of them are going to have strong militaries. And I almost forgot to talk about this, but they're going to have that conscription. I think I talked about it in the previous one, but they're going to have that conscripted military, or that draft where they're going to kind of go to their conquered areas and take some of the children, the young men there, and turn those into a loyal military service. So all 3 are going to do versions of that. All right, so the Mughal dynasty, we can see the Mughal Empire. We can see the portions of the Mughal Empire. So it's not going to be nearly as large as the other dynasties, but it's still going to be very, very important and very unifying to this region. Okay, so it's going to help bring more unity into India, even though India is never really going to have in the early histories a dominant political force until much later on in their history. They're going to kind of be that mosaic, that fragmented culture and mixture of cultures to kind of come together. They make that Indic culture. All right, so let's move on to Western Christendom in the High Middle Ages. So the High Middle Ages is going to be the 1100s through the 1300s. They're going to experience a growth in prosperity, population, and cultural achievements. So part of that can be directly linked to the Islamic empires. So as these Islamic empires start to expand and go further out, we're going to see that Western Europe or Christian Europe is going to be like, whoa, we have to get it together, or we're going to be taken over completely and dominated completely by Islamic societies. All right, so population growth pulled laborers from the countryside into cities. So just like in a bunch of other places, when you have an increase in population, your population has to go somewhere. And that's going to cause what we know as urbanization. So urbanization. That's going to be the formation and the building of cities. So as you grow your population, all these people can't live on the countryside anymore. They have to go into the cities, and they have to kind of get jobs so they can take care of themselves and also take care of the country. So we're going to see European cities are going to face a housing crunch. They can't build houses quick enough for the amount of people being born. And so once again, these population booms happen because you have an agricultural change. So when agricultural change happens and you produce more food, then you have more people. These things always go hand in hand. Agricultural boom, population boom, cities develop. All right, so women are going to be excluded from professions, but they're going to make gains in retail trades, weaving, and food production. So they're still excluded from a lot of different things, but they're able to make money in manufacturing things, like in trading or in weaving or in production of foods like farming and things like that. So they have a much smaller impact in society during this time period. And also we're going to see a rapid change over the next 200 to 300 years for women in Western Europe and what they do and how they're utilized in the home, in the family, in the workspace, so on and so forth. So moving on. Western Christendom in the High Middle Ages continued. So most of Europe's 80 million inhabitants stayed rooted in their local communities. So people aren't moving. They're not moving around. Wherever you're born is pretty much where you stay. If we kind of compare that to what's happening in other places, like the caste system, wherever you're born into is where you stay. And that's similarly happening all around the world during this time period. So it's not going to be until a little bit later on in world history that we're going to see more people migrating and moving around. So the most movement you have right now is going to be moving from country areas into cities. So growing prosperity is going to allow for cultural flowering with advances in the arts, technology, learning, architecture, and banking. So arts are going to flourish because they're going to be doing more trading. And once again, when you have more money, you're able to buy more things, you're able to invest in more things and have government sponsored art and things like that. You're going to have that rebirth happening kind of after the dark ages kind of flowing through. Next up, you're going to have technological advancements. So these could be just minor things. It could be metal tipped plows. This could be the early beginnings of some of the machines that we're going to use to make cloth and things like that. Learning is going to advance. So basically, we're going to see the Gutenberg printing press is going to move west. So the printing press originally starts in China, but Chinese has a lot of characters. So like a lot of written characters, about I think 40,000 characters, something like that. So whereas English has 26. So Chinese has a lot more characters. And so as the printing press moves, it's going to have to evolve because most languages have fewer and fewer characters. So they're going to evolve it and turn it into the Gutenberg printing press. And that printing press is going to help with learning because, okay, let me go back. So basically we're going to see that because of certain Islamic empires, certain Christian areas, or formerly Christian areas like the Byzantine Empire, did not want to be under Islamic control. So some of those formerly Byzantine residents would flee and go into Western Europe. And one thing they brought with them was the printing press. So we're going to see a flourishing in learning because they're able to print more books. And when you have more books, you're able to have more literacy, and people are going to be, just exposed to more things. Architecture is also going to flourish. So once again, you're going to have similar things happening in the Islamic world in India, where you're going to have state-sponsored buildings that are going to be these gigantic, beautiful buildings that really show you the development of society and their growth. And finally, as well as in banking. So we're going to see our first creations of trust. A trust is basically a group that's going to kind of work together to set prices to make money. And then from your trust, you're going to be able to then kind of make monopolies or make other economic things. And so we're going to see the rise of banking, where people are going to be like, I want to trade in different parts of Europe, but I don't necessarily want to carry cash with me. Or I want to be able to put my cash in some location or someplace so I may not have to get robbed. And that's going to see the rise of banks during this time period. Even though we have a banking industry that's already on the rise in China. All right, so just like in other places, we see the rise of knowledge. So universities are going to attract people into medicine, into law, and into theology. So we're going to see a moving of history around the world, and we're going to be seeing it spread in forms of medicine and law and things like that. And theology just has to do with God and things of that nature. So some scholars are going to turn to Islamic, Greek, and Roman learning. So we see a lot of European knowledge or content during this time can be found previously in other parts of the world, but Europeans get the credit and not always the Islamic, Greek, and Roman founders of the content. Climactic change and plague in Europe. So reactions, revolts, and religion. All of these things are going to be intertwined in this slide. So changes in climate are going to begin around 1310. They're going to bring famine, where millions are going to die of starvation. Now, if we have any kind of environmental shift, it still can cause famine, but some more developed places will have piping and plumbing, or not plumbing, but water pipes that allow water to be moved from one part of a continent into another. During this time period, they don't have that access. So whenever there's going to be any kind of change in the environment, it's going to lead to famines where millions are usually going to lose their lives because they're not able to move around into different areas, or to take a plane or a train, or to just move their food into an area where more rain is coming in. Let's talk about the plague now. So the plague in Europe. The plague is going to kill 2/3. So over 60% of Europe's population is going to die between 1346 and 1353. So in 7 years, just a mere 7 years, 60+% of Europe's population is going to die. So Europe has a population around 80 million people. So 60% of that dies. We're going to see, what's that, about 50 million people are going to pass away, 55 million people, something like that. So cities are going to be especially vulnerable because they don't really understand how the plague spreads. Do they have microscopes? Do they know that it's a bacteria? Do they know all these things? No. Okay. So we're going to see cities are going to be especially vulnerable because they're overcrowded and they're usually super unsanitary. These are the time periods where you don't have running water, so people are just throwing their, feces, their pee out windows or into the water and not really caring about sanitation because they don't really have a firm understanding of it, which is odd because sanitation and things like that had been happening in Africa for centuries before this, but they're there. Okay. So by 1450, Europe's population had fallen to a quarter of its size. So a quarter of its size. So a lot of people, if they don't die, they're going to try to flee and outrun the plague and leave the areas. The plague in Europe. So it's going to create long-lasting psychological, social, and economic and political changes throughout Afro-Eurasia. So individuals are going to turn away from religion during this time period. So they're going to say, hey, we kind of prayed during this time period. And unfortunately, some of our prayers were not answered. A lot of people passed away. A lot of people died. The church was not able to really get a handle on these things. And that goes back to that divine right, that manifest destiny, that mandate of heaven, that divinely chosen thing. So if God chose you, why weren't you able to stop some of the issues that were happening, some of the negatives that were happening? So people are going to turn away from religion and turn towards more debauchery, more spirituality and less religion, and even some religious masochism. So just really just a 180 kind of from where they were previously. All right, so we're going to see different types of people in England are going to engage in public self-punishment by whipping themselves with a flagella. It's going to be a whip with metal pieces until they became bloody and swollen. And that's going to be kind of their way of cleansing themselves and being more pure and getting rid of some of their negative energy and things like that. So peasants are going to become hostile to clergy, excesses, and the absence in the time of crisis. So they're not going to be as comfortable with donating money and giving funds because they felt like the church didn't take care of them when they needed them the most in the midst of a crisis. So how is the church going to respond to these things? So the church is going to, for a while, the Christian church specifically, they're going to struggle to reclaim its power in the face of challenges from the top and from below. So it's going to have a hard time in a while before they completely recover some of their greatness and dominance that they had kind of had before this time period. So we're going to see an increase in persecution. So what they're going to do, they're not going to get nicer. They're going to actually get firmer in how they interact with some of their believers or their followers. So they're going to have persecution of heretics. So people who are speaking ill against the church, they're going to make sure that they punish that person violently. They're going to do that against people who are Jewish, people speaking ill of the church, Muslims, homosexuals, people who are prostitutes, and people who are witches. So all of the negative people in society, they're going to try to eradicate and kill off. And they're going to do that by persecuting them and kind of banishing them or killing them off. They're also, number two, so one, they're going to get rid of people who might influence some of their followers into converting or into doing non-religious things, but they're also going to expand their charity and giving of alms to the poor. So the first charity or the first social service organizations are going to be founded in churches. The first social services organization. So we think about social workers and things like that. Well, that originally starts in the church. So the church saw it as a responsibility to take care of people who were poor or had issues because of the plague. So we'll see, once again, they're going to push away people who might influence some of their former followers or some of their followers, but they're also going to give out money or gifts or services to people who are poor. So we're going to see a twofold response to how Christians are going to respond to the plague and people revolting and turning against them. The next and the last thing we're going to see is going to be a weakened feudal order. So we can say the plague helped to kind of end off feudalism. It's going to end it much quicker. One, it's going to kill off most of your peasants. They're going to die. Anyway, so we're going to, after you have most of your peasants passing away, you're going to see a large-scale peasant revolt. They're going to be pushing back from ill treatment and negative treatment. Like, why am I taking all this negative treatment when you need me a lot? So French peasant revolts and rampage against nobles and clergy in 1358 called Jacquerie. Jacquerie, I think that's how you pronounce that. And so we're going to see that people are just tired of being victimized by people who are, sitting on top of a throne or who have a lot of money and things like that, and who always want to have their hand out saying, give me more. give me more, while the peasants have nothing. So we're going to see a lot of uprisings during this time. Then we go on down in England, we have a peasant uprising in 1381, and it's going to start off as a protest against tax increases. And it's going to expand to include serf freedom and higher farmer working wages and lower rents. So we're going to see that protests are going to be the backbone of the society and getting better rights and things like that. So in France, they're going to rebel against people, the nobility and the church members who are kind of at the top and not really helping with anything that's happening post-plague or during the plague. In England, it's going to start out as a revolt against tax increases against peasants, because peasant taxes were going up, but the wealthy's taxes were not. And so as that revolt changes, we're going to see that it's going to actually lead to a long-term change of serfs having more freedom, of having higher farm wages, and of having lower rents that they have to pay on their farmlands. State building and economic recovery. So Europe's rulers attempted to rebuild and consolidate their power. So they're going to have to figure out, they have way less people and people don't trust them as much. So how are they going to rebuild? They're going to have to get a little bit smaller and get smarter with how they're operating financially and things like that. The most powerful dynasty is going to be the Habsburgs. They're going to provide emperors for the Holy Roman Empire from 1440 until 1806. So that bloodline is going to be there and be around in Europe for a very long time. I think the bloodline is still around to this day. Okay. And so with that, we're going to see that we're never going to see a restored Western Europe to an integrated empire. It's always going to be fragmented. And even to this day, Europe is still fragmented because there's a bunch of small countries inside of Europe. So a lot of those areas like the Franks or the Turks or whomever it might be, they just chose not to reunify. Europe is not going to have a unifying language, as Latin is going to lose most of its ground to regional dialects. Even to this day, Europe does not really have a unifying language. You have a lot of different languages throughout Europe: Spanish, English, French, Romanian, Slavic languages. Oh my goodness, there's so many different languages that are throughout Europe, and that all goes back to the plague and how people never reunified and how they never really had a dominant religion, a dominant language. So in other parts, it's going to be kind of similar. They're going to have such fragmented people, fragmented areas, different religions, different cultures, that it's going to be hard to unify them. But in Europe, they're not even going to try to unify them. They're going to just stay separate. Okay. Let's continue on. Europe's rulers attempted to rebuild and consolidate their power. So rulers are going to face obstacles from rival private armies, the clergy, and critics with the printing press. Whew, that was a mouthful, and that's a lot going on. So those private armies, those people who are employed to those janissaries, those mercenaries, those samurais, those whoever you want to call them, they're going to be wreaking havoc on the unification or the expansion in Europe. Another thing that's going to happen. The clergy is also going to be an obstacle because the clergy wants to be seen as a dominant force or a big part of European society, similar to what's happening in the Islamic world. So we're going to see a pushback between those rulers and the clergy. And that might even later on in history lead to the formation of a new form of Christianity, as well as new kingdoms and things like that. All right, and we're also going to see more critics rising up because you have the printing press. So with more knowledge, when people get smarter, they have more exposure to things, they're able to say, that's not what that says. I don't trust you. I don't believe you, and so on and so forth, which is going to limit some of these rulers from taking over and dominating areas. Europe's political reorganization took the form of centralized national monarchies or city-states, where the wealthy selected their leaders and occurred through strategic marriages. So these monarchies, right? So if I want to continue ruling these areas, hey, I have a daughter. I might send my daughter over. I'm in England. I might send my daughter over to Spain and to marry the Spanish prince over there. Or maybe the Romanian prince or the Germanic prince might send over their daughter, or kingdom might send over their daughter, so we can kind of intermarry and keep that bloodline going. And we're going to see a lot of intermarriages happening, or a lot of marriages to kind of keep that bloodline up and keep control in European society. So warfare, you kind of have the beginning parts of nations. You have people who are paid to be soldiers, who are paid to defend borders or to kind of recreate borders. And that's also going to be another hallmark of a lot of regions, and definitely during this region. So eventually we're also going to see that gunpowder is going to make its way on west and into Europe eventually. And finally, we're going to see growing economies because of trade with Southwest Asia. So as they get better with their ships and as they start doing more trading outside of Europe and they start dropping down into Southeast Asia, they're able to acquire more raw goods and they're able to expand their trading marketplaces even further, as well as bringing in more goods into European society from Southwest Asia, Southeast Asia, and as well as China. So here is a fragmented map of Europe during this time period. So between 1400 and 1500, here is our fragmented area, all these different regions and areas. You can see the Holy Roman Empire right here, Bohemia, Austria, Hungary, and some of these areas just before this time period are eventually going to be taken over by the Ottoman Empire and eventually dominated for a long time by the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so we're seeing basically Europe is in turmoil and in fragmenting and having a lot of issues during this time period. Let's move on down to the Iberian Peninsula. So the Iberian Peninsula is where Portugal and Spain are located. So political consolidation and trade in Portugal. Portugal is an example of how political stabilization and the revival of trade are intertwined. So mixing of political stabilization and the revival of trade. So Western Europe followed the Portuguese example of creating national monarchies, while in Northern Europe, the lack of access to trade added to political instabilities. So in Western Europe, they're going to look at what Portugal does, because Portugal is going to be at the forefront and ahead in a lot of different ways, and how they're going to bring the government into trading, and then from that, use that to fortify and stabilize their area. So it's going to be a model that a lot of other European nations that eventually are going to be dominating are going to take and use. So we're going to see a blending or a using of some of these outside ideas. So comparison, China doesn't want anyone's outside ideas, but the other portions of the world are more flexible and more willing to accept outsiders. All right, so in Northern Europe, though, because they don't have the ability to trade as much, because that's where Russia is, and they're kind of isolated and they're able to trade in certain areas, but they're only able to trade like furs and things like that. It's going to lead to more political instability because no money, no unification, so on and so forth. The Portuguese devoted to fighting North African Muslim Moors, so that Dark Ages. That's when Europe is going to be dominated by those Moors that are going to come from North Africa. Get it? Dark Ages, black people. Okay, anyway. So we're going to see a fighting or a push. It's like a fight from like good and evil. You must push it. Anyway, that's kind of what they make it seem like, even though I don't think it's that. Anyway, whatever. So we're going to see the Portuguese are going to be really, really invested in fighting the North African Muslims and pushing those back. Okay, they're going to seize the North African fortress in Morocco, and it's going to allow them access to the Mediterranean and the Atlantic without interference. So previously, if they want to trade in those areas, they have to like pay a fee or just not trade at all because the Muslims or the Moors are not messing with them at all. All right, we're also going to see that modern day Spain is going to be reclaimed or taken back from the Moors. So now we have Henry the Navigator. He's going to conquer the Atlantic islands off the North and West African coast. So we see slowly but surely as the Moors start to decline and lose power, it's going to be easy pickings, and it's easy for the Europeans to come forward and push them further into Africa. And monarchs are going to grant land to hereditary nobles to colonize, and nobility supported the monarch in return. So basically, we're going to see this family bloodline of richness, of wealth, and things like that. And that's going to be what allows, those nobilities are going to be what allows the monarchs to continue to dominate and control, because the nobility is like, yes, please, monarch, please continue expanding, please continue taking over and starting to colonize and kind of exploit some of these territories. So colonizers are going to establish a lucrative sugar plantation on the island. Ooh, we are heading towards slavery in America or in the Europe so quickly. It's pretty scary. So that's going to be that first thing. So sugar is going to be one of those crops that Europe is going to be addicted to, and they're going to use a lot of slave labor to accomplish that. And what's the best place to find slaves? Regions you just conquered. All right, so I think I'm going to stop it here just because we're heading towards the end and we only have about 20 more slides left, okay? So I'm gonna stop it here. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll see you all soon on Zoom or wherever, maybe next year, maybe we won't be on Zoom, who knows? Anyway, have a great day. See you soon.